Okay, let's dive right in and uncover the shocking, globe-trotting evolution of the world's most famous everyday condiment. I mean, think about the bottle of ketchup sitting in your fridge right now. We associate it so deeply with modern American cuisine, right? Burgers, fries, summer barbecues. It honestly feels like it's been the same bright red staple forever. But the truth is, the story of ketchup is actually a wild, multi-millennium journey across empires and oceans. Today, we're going to unpack exactly how a sauce that started out on ancient fishing boats transformed into the ubiquitous red icon we all know today.
Now picture this. It's mid-18th century England, and people are absolutely crazy for ketchup. It was a massive staple. You had countless cookbooks from the era aggressively encouraging home cooks to pour ketchup over stews, over roasted vegetables, and, incredibly, even over desserts. Now, if pouring ketchup on dessert sounds totally disgusting to you, well, it's because this 18th century ketchup wasn't the sweet red goop you're thinking of. It was actually a sweet and savory brown sauce.
And that brings us to a massive culinary mystery. Because to find out what was actually in that popular brown sauce, we have to acknowledge the missing ingredient. Early ketchup contained exactly 0 tomatoes, literally none, zilch. So you might be wondering, where did this early tomato-less ketchup come from, and how in the world did it become the dip we dunk our fries into today? Well, to answer that, we have to trace its genealogy all the way back to 300 BCE.
To really understand the origins, we have to look at the original Chinese method of making what was essentially fish sauce. As early as 300 BCE, Chinese fishermen were pulling in batches of small fish. Now, these catches were way too plentiful to eat all at once, but they were also just too small and time-consuming to individually preserve. So they came up with an ingenious three-step process. First, they salted the day's catch and stored it all together. Then, over several months, the internal enzymes of the fish would literally break down their own body's proteins. They would ferment. The end result was a rich, deeply salty liquid that was strained and stored. And that right there, that was ketchup's earliest ancestor.
Now, this fishy foundation wasn't just some local Chinese specialty. It literally fueled entire ancient empires across the world. The ancient Greeks and later the Romans who conquered them built their entire cuisine around this strong umami flavor. They called their version of this fermented fish sauce garum. Garum was so essential that it traveled with every single Roman soldier to the empire's front lines. They even constructed dozens of massive fish sauce factories all throughout the Mediterranean, producing thousands upon thousands of gallons. But when the Roman Empire finally collapsed, their massive condiment business collapsed right along with it. In fact, most Europeans actually cooked without fish sauce entirely for 1,000 years.
So how did the sauce make its grand return to Europe? We'll skip ahead to the early 1600s. The Dutch East India Company arrives in Southeast Asia. The Dutch and the English started exploiting the region for countless goods, and among those goods were barrels of the most common local condiment, that familiar, fermented fishy liquid. Over in Asia, it went by many names, including ketchup and kokup. But upon arriving in British ports, those native titles were completely bastardized by English tongues into the word, you guessed it, ketchup. This kicked off Europe's second great wave of fish sauce supremacy.
For a while, European ships supplied this Asian ketchup all over the Western Hemisphere, but in the mid-1700s, Europeans were actually kicked out of Asian trade hubs. The supply was completely cut off. And the British public absolutely refused to let their favorite sauce disappear, so a massive crop of cookbooks emerged featuring wild recipes for knockoff ketchups. I mean, we are talking concoctions made of oysters, anchovies, mushrooms, and walnuts. Ketchup basically became a catch-all name for pretty much any dark, savory brown sauce. And interestingly enough, this desperate ketchup hunt actually birthed some of England's most enduring modern condiments, establishing the legacy of familiar brown sauces like Worcester, A1, and HP.
But the pivotal moment that changed everything happened across the Atlantic. While tomatoes had wildly varying levels of popularity over in Europe, American chefs were actively experimenting, putting this new world fruit into all kinds of dishes. And that brings us to the year 1812, when a Philadelphian physician and food hobbyist named James Mees debuted the very first tomato-based ketchup.
Actually, scratch that, we were still a long way from the modern Heinz bottle, today. Mees' early 1812 recipe was honestly a thin, watery concoction. It relied on tomato pulp, spices, raw shallots, and brandy. Yep, brandy. There was no sugar and no massive amounts of vinegar yet. It was a very far cry from fermented fish sauce for sure, but also a really far cry from the thick red condiment we slather on our burgers today.
So why the tomato? Why did this specific fruit completely take over the ketchup name? Well, it turns out it wasn't just a random substitution, it was pure chemistry.
Tomatoes have incredibly high levels of glutamate. That is the exact same chemical responsible for the rich, savory umami flavor found in fermented fish sauce. So without even fully realizing the molecular science of it, early American food pioneers were chemically mimicking the exact savory flavor profile of ancient Roman garum and Asian ketchup. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
During the back half of the 1800s, there was a massive surge in bottled foods. By the 1870s, companies had dropped the shallots and brandy from the tomato ketchup recipe, replacing them with sugar, salt, and sodium benzoate. Now, sodium benzoate was a really questionable preservative used at the time. Enter Henry J. Heinz. After starting out selling pickled vegetables, Heinz pivoted to ketchups, and at the turn of the 20th century, he went on a quest for healthier, natural ingredients. He completely abandoned the sketchy sodium benzoate, swapping it for much riper tomatoes in huge amounts of vinegar to naturally preserve the sauce.
This new mixture created what we can call the Heinz standard. The result of all that pectin from those riper tomatoes, combined with a minced vinegar, was an incredibly thick, goopy formula, and it was an instant smash hit bestseller. What's so funny about this is that it became a massive success despite the fact that this thickness made it dramatically harder to get out of the glass bottle. But it didn't matter. Over the 20th century, this specific, sticky, salty red recipe conquered the globe, perfectly pairing as the ultimate ambassador alongside American cuisine.
When you put all the pieces together, the complete picture of this evolution is just incredible. We start in 300 BCE with Chinese fishermen fermenting their excess catch into a salty liquid. We leap forward to the 1600s, where the Dutch East India Company exports ketchup to Europe, bastardizing the name into ketchup. Then to 1812, where American James Mees introduces the glutamate-rich New World tomato to the recipe. And finally, the 1900s, where Henry J. Heinz locks in the thick, vinegar-heavy standard we all know. It is a grand evolutionary journey across centuries and empires. Today, the modern reality of this sauce is staggering. To put it into perspective, a whopping 90% of American households currently have ketchup sitting in their kitchens. It is an absolute, unquestionable modern necessity. But even beyond that, Heinz's red recipe has actually become the foundational base for dozens of other sauces and salad dressings across the culinary world. And every single one of them, in name and chemical spirit, descends from that exact same Fishy family tree.
So I want to challenge you to look at that ubiquitous red plastic bottle in your fridge completely differently from now on. It's not just a simple tomato paste. It's a survivor of the Roman Empire's collapse, a veteran of the Dutch spice trade, and a massive triumph of early American food science. So I'll leave you with this question. The next time you squeeze that bottle over your fries tonight, will you just taste the American tomato, or will you taste the umami ghosts of a 2,000-year-old fermented fish sauce? Thanks for learning with me today on this explainer. Keep questioning the everyday things around you.